Hello humans. Today I wanted to talk about a couple of lighters in my collection that are very specifically designed for smokers, and why I think that they represent sort of an interesting cross-section between carrying lighters as a way of making fire, or as a tool for work, or as basically something that you need in an everyday life, versus a tool specifically made for smoking and for people who have, nicotine addictions. And I think that these two lighters in my collection do a really good job of sort of representing what you do when you want to make a product exactly for your specific demographic. So I'm going to start off with these guys here. Both of them don't have particularly well-known brands that made them, so I'm not really going to get into the history of either of these guys company-wise, but I am going to get into a little bit about their designs. So this little guy right here is designed to slot up against either a cardboard cigarette package or one of those little tin ones that you could use if you didn't want to use a cardboard one, basically. And the idea being that you slot it into the open section, tip out your cigarette, and then probably with your left hand you can push down on this, light the tip of your cigarette, and go on about your day. It can be removed from this sort of tin or sheet steel holding section simply by unscrewing both of these two screws, and then it becomes its own little standalone lighter. As its own standalone lighter, it's not a very comfortable design. If you end up using this and you push down with your thumb, you actually have to be pretty careful because the flame can burn your fingertip very easily. It's one of the downsides of having the flame coming from sort of directly below where you're pushing with your thumb. If you wanted to compare that to, for example, to a Zippo, where there's no reason for your fingers to ever be in front of the light, you keep all of your movement entirely to the side. In comparison, this little guy, your finger's pretty much directly over top of it, which does make it a little bit more difficult to use. However, what that also means is that there's this nice little tin section that is preventing your cardboard cigarette package from being caught alight during use. Overall, this little guy right here is an add-on to your cigarettes, is to make sure that you never really lose your lighter, or contrastly, you never really lose your cigarettes, depending on which one you have an easier time keeping on you. And overall, it's a convenience thing. It makes sure that whenever you have your cigarettes, you also have your lighter on you. But at the same time, it can be turned into a little independent lighter if this design, for whatever reason, happens to speak to you. Unfortunately, my version is actually missing the screw that holds the lighter fluid inside of the lighter. So I may need to find one of those in order to finish restoring this little guy. And it currently does not have any flint in it because of I didn't really think it was worth putting flint in until I figure out how to get a nicely sized screw in order to keep that going. In terms of design, it's very simple. It has the manufacturer's name stamped onto it, and other than that, it is simply a polished steel. Very simple, not too complex by any means. On the other side of the spectrum, we have this sort of all-in-one approach where you have a lighter based off of that very famous Ronson Spark design, and inside of it you have your holder for your cigarettes. You lift this right here up, you line up your little cigarettes, and you can do the same on the other side. I'm not entirely sure what the capacity is, but likely 12. That would also, I guess, depend on whether or not you're doing home-rolled cigarettes or switching out your pack for this. This guy right here is also very much designed around convenience. It is fairly difficult to lose something of this size, and especially, during the 60s and 70s when these things were being produced, having something of this size in your pocket wouldn't be competing for space with stuff like your phone. It would be more accurately competing with, say, your wallet, and you have two pockets. So it's easy enough to keep your wallet and your keys in one side and something like this in the other side, just to make sure that you always have your cigarettes on you. This particular, design-wise, this particular one has this nice stamping on the sheet itself, including this little area which is designed to have your name or your initials engraved onto the actual case. The back features the same design. I don't know how well you can see that, but it has this little push tab, which causes the packet itself to open. The push tab is on this very simple little leaf spring. And these two holders which are actually what pushes the case open as well. Use this little tiny spring right there in the middle, which means push it, it pops open. Filling this lighter is done from the inside right here. It has these two screws. You can actually pop the top off entirely, and then if you open up this screw underneath, you have both your flint screw as well as space to fill up your lighter so that you never run out. In terms of people who do not smoke like myself, this one here is actually more useful day to day because you can use, especially if you're keeping it in a pack or something along those lines, you can use this internal space to fill up with little fire starters. If you are, for example, camping, hiking, something along those lines, you can make yourself a bunch of small rolled aids. I personally would probably do small candles on this side right here, like birthday candles, something like that, that will burn for a fairly long time at a relatively warm temperature that will help you light something else. And then like emergency fire starters, like a little fatwood rolls or something along those lines on the other side in the event that I need a lot of heat quickly. So something like this with this little storage pouch can be used obviously for cigarettes as it was initially designed, but is also quite useful for more survival-oriented tasks if that is what you are interested in. In terms of practicality, both of these are sort of meh products. Something like this isn't too unreasonable to add to a cigarette packet, but all things considered, you're limiting the use of your lighter quite a bit by doing this. It becomes much more unwieldy to use and isn't particular, like it has to be designed to those specifications of a cigarette packet, which means if something along the lines of the industry changes and cigarette packages become smaller or bigger, more likely smaller, it will not fit anymore, which does reduce its longevity a little bit, but honestly, this one here in particular is so cheaply made that it doesn't matter that much. Something like this is a little bit more timeless. A lot more people back in the day used to carry cigarette packets like this, which would hold their cigarettes with these little retentions. And building the lighter into it seems like a pretty practical solution. Overall, this lighter is not uncomfortable to use. It is a little bit large, but if you were to say, you know, have your cigarette, flick, it's not uncomfortable. And in terms of fitting into a pocket, both of these will fit fairly well. Obviously, this one here is quite a bit larger and therefore more difficult. But if you were to compare it to, say, a phone or even smaller, this is my iPod Touch, it fits pretty well the same size as an iPod Touch does. It's not brutally large. And as a result, it's actually going to be smaller than most phones are today. So if you take a standard pair of jeans or suit slacks, it's going to fit roughly the same. Overall, these products make a lot of sense. They understood the market that they were going into, but I think that a lot of people, especially people who use lighters for work or do a lot of camping, stuff like that, this is limiting your target pool a little bit. And targeting specifically people who smoke, whilst it is a relatively good method, especially back in the 60s and 70s, it is something that is going to reduce the overall longevity of your product, in my opinion. And I understand that quite a few people still smoke today, but the numbers have been going down quite a bit for a long time, and people are still buying lighters, which I think kind of says that these are truly a product of their time. They're also fairly novel, not exactly practical in all situations. They are both going to be larger, and you are going to make concessions in order to do both at the same time. That is just the nature of these types of products. But they do represent a neat little timepiece in history, and they are fairly cool lighters that fit well into my collection. Stay safe and have fun out there. Peace.